The sun had just started to rise, casting a soft golden glow through the glass windows of the tall corporate building. The city outside was still stretching awake, but inside that building a man was already hard at work. He moved quietly, pushing his cleaning cart along the silent hallways. His name was Arif, and for years he had been the one who made sure every corner of that office was spotless before the employees arrived. Arif was not like most people. He had lost his hearing when he was very young, and because of that he lived in a world of silence. Yet this silence never stopped him from doing his job with full dedication. Every morning he arrived earlier than anyone else. He would mop the floors, polish the tables, and neatly arrange the chairs in the meeting rooms. He worked with such focus that people often said his silence was not a weakness but a strength. Most of the employees liked him. They knew he could not hear their words, but they always greeted him with smiles, nods, or simple hand gestures. Arif responded with a warm smile of his own, sometimes writing small notes to communicate, and other times using his hands to sign. He never complained, never asked for favors, and always worked with quiet dignity, but not everyone treated him kindly. A few weeks ago, a new manager joined the company. His name was Kamal. Unlike the others, Kamal didn't seem to respect Arif. Instead, he often ridiculed him in front of others. When Arif walked into a room, Kamal would sometimes exaggerate his hand movements, pretending to mimic sign language, and then laugh loudly. It made others uncomfortable, but no one spoke up. After all, Kamal was the manager, and most people didn't want to get on his bad side. Arif, on the other hand, tried not to let it bother him. He would simply bow his head, give a faint smile, and continue working. Deep inside, though, he felt hurt. He had faced ridicule many times in his life. From strangers, from people in the streets, and even from those who thought disability made a person less valuable. But every time he reminded himself that kindness and patience were stronger than cruelty. One morning, as Arif was cleaning the large meeting hall, Kamal walked in with a group of employees. They were preparing for a client meeting. Arif quietly stepped aside, holding his mop and bucket so they could walk past. But Kamal, noticing him, smirked and said loudly, "Don't worry. He can't hear us anyway." Then he made a joke about Arif's silence, causing a few nervous chuckles from the staff who didn't know how to respond. Arif looked down, pretending not to notice. He kept his hand steady on the mop, though his heart sank a little. He wasn't angry. Anger was never his way, but he felt the sting of disrespect. Still, when the meeting was over and the room was left in a mess, he quietly went back in and cleaned every table, every glass, every piece of trash. By the time he was done, the place looked as if no one had ever been there. This was his way of speaking. Not with words, but with actions. Every day continued in much the same way. Arif arrived early, worked with dedication, and left late in the evening. And every day Kamal found small ways to mock him. Sometimes Kamal accused him of missing a spot while cleaning, even though the floors shined like mirrors. Other times he waved his hands dramatically, saying, "Oh, maybe he didn't hear me," even though he knew Arif could understand through notes and gestures. The employees noticed. They exchanged looks whenever Kamal went too far. Some wanted to defend Arif, but fear kept them quiet. They needed their jobs, and confronting the manager was risky. So instead they gave Arif small kindnesses, helping him carry supplies, leaving him thank you notes, or simply showing extra respect. Arif appreciated these gestures, though he never demanded them. One evening, after most of the staff had left, Arif was still cleaning the hallways. The office was quiet, and only the hum of the ceiling lights filled the air. He worked slowly, polishing the floors until they gleamed. As he reached the reception area, he noticed something out of place. A chair was tipped slightly to the side, as though someone had been in a hurry. He fixed it, then carefully wiped down the desk. It was in these quiet moments that Arif felt at peace. He didn't need sound to know the world was alive around him. He could see the city lights outside, the reflection of the moon on the glass windows, the soft flicker of screens left on by careless employees. To him, these small details were enough, but even in peace, he knew trouble could appear without warning. The next morning, the staff arrived to find the office shining, just as always. Arif had already finished his work and was pushing his cart back to the storage room. A group of employees smiled at him as they walked by, but when Kamal came in, his expression was different. He looked annoyed, as if something had already gone wrong. He glanced at Arif and muttered something under his breath. Later that day, during lunch break, some employees sat together in the cafeteria. One of them whispered, "I don't understand why the manager treats him that way. He's one of the hardest workers here." Another nodded, adding, "It's just cruel. He deserves respect, not mockery." They glanced around, making sure Kamal wasn't nearby. Everyone agreed, but once again, silence fell over the group. Nobody wanted to risk their position by challenging the man in charge. Arif entered the cafeteria at that moment, carrying his cleaning cloth and spray bottle. He started wiping down the empty tables, humming softly to himself, though he couldn't hear the sound. Some of the employees watched him with admiration, while others looked away, not wanting him to see the pity in their eyes. Arif noticed none of this. He only focused on his work, moving from table to table with calm, steady hands. What none of them knew was that soon, something would happen that would change everything. The way they saw Arif, the way they saw their manager, and even the way they thought about respect itself. It would all be transformed. For now, Arif remained in the background, unnoticed by many, underestimated by some, and ridiculed by one. But his story was only beginning, and the truth waiting to come out would leave everyone in that office stunned. Days turned into weeks, and the office continued its usual rhythm. Deadlines came and went. Clients visited, meetings were held, and through it all, Arif kept working silently in the background. He was like the quiet heartbeat of the building, always present, always reliable, but rarely noticed. But the new manager seemed determined to make things harder for him. Kamal carried himself with pride, often speaking loudly as if his voice alone was enough to prove authority. Whenever he passed Arif in the hallway, he either ignored him completely or stopped to throw in a remark that would sting. One morning, Arif was dusting the shelves near the conference room. Kamal walked by with two employees. They were discussing sales numbers, but as soon as Kamal spotted Arif, he paused mid-sentence. With a smirk, he said to the others, "Watch this. He won't even notice." Then he stood right behind Arif and made exaggerated clapping motions, laughing silently. The two employees looked uneasy. One of them whispered, "That's not funny," but Kamal just waved it off. When Arif turned and saw them staring, he immediately stepped aside with a polite smile, thinking he was in their way. He didn't know they had just been laughing at him. He simply nodded and went back to his work, as calm as ever. But inside, a small ache grew. He had faced many hardships in life, but ridicule always left a mark. Yet he chose silence over confrontation. He believed dignity came from actions, not arguments. Later that week, an incident happened that spread unease among the staff. The office had just hosted an important meeting with a client. After the meeting ended, Kamal walked into the room and found a few papers scattered on the floor. He called out angrily, "Who cleaned this place?" An employee replied, "Arif already cleaned it, sir. Maybe someone dropped those after he left." But Kamal didn't listen. He summoned Arif right away. When Arif arrived with his cart, Kamal waved the papers in his face and spoke loudly, as if speaking to a child. "Do you even know how to do your job properly? Look at this, a complete mess." Arif quickly bent down, picked up the papers, and tried to explain with hand gestures that the mess hadn't been there earlier. He pointed at the wastebasket, neatly emptied, and at the spotless floor. But Kamal crossed his arms and said mockingly, "Oh, sure, I bet you didn't hear me say it had to be perfect." He exaggeratedly tapped his ear, then shook his head. Several employees stood nearby, watching. Their expressions showed discomfort. One of them even muttered under his breath, "This isn't right." But once again, nobody stepped in. Arif bowed slightly, collected the papers, and left quietly. His face didn't show anger, only a tired kind of sadness. He knew he had done his work correctly, yet he was being blamed for something beyond his control. That night, after everyone left, Arif stayed back longer than usual. He polished the floors until they gleamed, dusted every corner, and made sure not a single chair was out of place. He worked slowly, carefully, as if to prove to himself that his work still had value, even if others didn't see it. The next morning, employees arrived to find the office shining brighter than ever. Some nodded at Arif in appreciation, a silent way of telling him they noticed. He smiled back, thankful for even the smallest gestures of kindness. But Kamal, instead of appreciating, found another excuse. He walked into the lobby, rubbed a finger along the spotless table and said loudly, still not good enough. Maybe I should hire someone who actually listens. This time the silence in the room felt heavy. People looked down at their desks, uncomfortable. Some wanted to say something but didn't dare. Arif, however, didn't respond. He simply returned to his cart and pushed it away slowly, his face calm but his eyes holding a quiet strength. It seemed like the manager wanted to break him, to prove that his disability made him less capable. But what no one knew was that Arif had lived through far harsher trials in his life. Losing his hearing as a child had been only one of them. He had faced poverty, rejection, and long nights of loneliness. Yet through it all he chose not to grow bitter. Instead, he worked hard, stayed patient, and built a life of quiet dignity. One afternoon, while Arif was mopping the corridor, two young employees walked past. They were whispering about Kamal's behavior. One said softly, "I can't stand how he treats him." "It's just wrong," the other replied. "Yeah, but what can we do? He's the manager. If we say something, we might lose our jobs." They shook their heads and walked away. Arif noticed their glances, but he didn't ask. He knew people often felt pity, but he didn't want pity. He wanted respect. The tension grew day by day. Kamal seemed to find pleasure in pointing out mistakes that didn't exist. One time, he accused Arif of leaving a window open, even though another employee admitted she had been the one to forget. Another time, he shouted at Arif for not setting the chairs correctly in the meeting room, though in truth Arif had arranged them perfectly. Every false accusation left a mark, not only on Arif but also on the rest of the employees. They began to lose respect for their manager. Whispers spread quietly through the office, and the once friendly atmosphere turned heavy. Yet through it all, Arif continued working. He didn't skip a day, didn't complain, and didn't let anger take over. His silence spoke louder than any words could, but something was about to happen that would change the situation completely. The moment that would expose the truth was just around the corner. It started with a missing item. One evening after the staff had left, a piece of expensive office equipment couldn't be found. The next morning, panic spread through the building. Kamal immediately called a short meeting and announced, "Something important has gone missing, and I have a pretty good idea who might be responsible." Everyone looked around nervously. Then their eyes fell on Arif, who was standing in the corner with his cart. Kamal turned toward him and said in a sharp voice, "You're the one who stays here late every night, aren't you? You're always wandering around with your cart. Maybe you saw something, maybe you took it." The room went silent. Arif's eyes widened slightly. He shook his head quickly, raising his hands to show he didn't understand why he was being accused. He pulled out a small notepad from his pocket and wrote down, "I did not take anything. I only clean." He held the paper out for Kamal to see, but Kamal didn't even look at it. He waved it away and said loudly, "That's what they all say. But we'll find out soon enough." The employees shifted uncomfortably. Some looked angry, others disappointed, but nobody spoke up. Arif stood there quietly, holding the notepad in his hand, his face calm but his heart heavy. Kamal crossed his arms and announced, "Check the surveillance cameras. If he's innocent, fine. If not, we'll know." The words hung in the air like a storm cloud. Arif lowered his head not because he was guilty, but because once again he was being treated as less than human. Yet inside he held on to his truth. He knew the cameras would reveal it, because he had done nothing wrong. What no one realized was that the cameras would not only prove his innocence, but also uncover something far greater. Something that would shock everyone in that office, leaving them speechless, and it would change the way they looked at Arif forever. The tension in the office grew heavier after the announcement about checking the surveillance cameras. For the first time, some employees began to feel real fear, not because of Arif, but because of what the manager was capable of doing. It was one thing to make cruel jokes, but to accuse a man who had spent years serving the company with honesty, that was something no one expected. Arif, on the other hand, remained calm on the outside. He had always been used to silence, and perhaps that silence gave him strength. When the meeting ended, he quietly rolled his cart back to the storage room and continued working as though nothing had happened. Inside, though, his heart felt heavy. He thought about his small home, about the bills he needed to pay, about how this job was his only source of survival. He couldn't afford to lose it, not after everything he had endured. The employees returned to their desks, whispering in low voices. Some of them shook their heads, saying it wasn't fair. A young staff member muttered, "He's been here longer than most of us. Why would he ever steal?" Another replied, "Exactly. He barely talks to anyone. All he does is clean and go home." But no matter what they thought, the decision had already been made. The cameras would be checked that evening and the truth would come out. That day seemed longer than usual. Arif continued his routine, moving through each floor with his mop, cloth, and cleaning sprays. He polished the glass doors, arranged the chairs neatly, and even watered the plants in the lobby. He did it all with his usual focus, but anyone who looked closely could see his eyes carried a shadow of worry. Meanwhile, the manager walked around the office with confidence. He kept repeating to anyone who would listen, "You'll see. I trust my instincts. Something about him isn't right." His words made the atmosphere even more uncomfortable. When evening came and most of the employees were leaving, a few of them stayed behind, curious to see what the cameras would show. The security guard brought in the footage and everyone gathered in the conference room. Arif was not called to join them. He was still working on the lower floor, wiping down tables quietly. The guard played the footage from the night before, the time when the missing equipment had supposedly disappeared. The room went silent as the black and white images appeared on the screen. They saw Arif moving through the hallways, pushing his cart, stopping now and then to clean windows and dust desks. Nothing unusual, but then something happened that no one expected. The footage showed a figure slipping into the building late at night. It wasn't an employee. The man wore a cap pulled low and tried to move quickly, staying close to the walls. He walked toward the storage area where the expensive equipment was kept. Gasps filled the room. The employees looked at each other, shocked. Then the camera showed Arif again. He had been nearby, polishing the glass doors. Somehow, even without hearing, he noticed the shadow moving in the corner of his vision. He stopped, squinted, and then quickly put down his cloth. Instead of panicking, Arif followed quietly at a distance. He saw the intruder trying to open the storage door. With quick thinking, Arif rushed to the security guard's desk. He tapped on the desk, waved his arms, and pointed toward the hallway. The guard, at first confused, realized something was wrong. He ran down the corridor and caught the stranger before he could take anything. On the screen, the entire incident was clear as day. Arif had not only been innocent, but he had also been the very person who saved the company from losing its valuable property. The room fell silent again, but this time it wasn't awkward. It was heavy with shame. Everyone turned their eyes toward the manager, who stood frozen in place. His confident smile was gone. His face grew pale as the truth stared back at him from the screen. One employee finally broke the silence. "So he wasn't guilty. He was the hero," another added. "All this time we thought he was being treated unfairly, and now look. He saved us." The guard paused the footage, leaving the image of Arif pointing bravely toward the intruder frozen on the screen. The manager cleared his throat and tried to say something, but his words didn't come out. For once, he had nothing to mock, nothing to accuse. Meanwhile, downstairs, Arif had no idea any of this was happening. He was still wiping the reception desk, humming softly in silence just as he always did. To him, it was another ordinary night of work. When the employees left the conference room, their expressions had changed completely. They looked at each other, ashamed that they had stayed silent when Arif was ridiculed. Many of them felt guilty for laughing nervously at the manager's jokes or for turning away when things became uncomfortable. Now they realized how wrong they had been. One of them whispered, "He deserves so much more respect than we've ever given him." Another said, "And the manager, he should apologize. He humiliated him for weeks." The news began to spread quietly through the office. By the next morning, everyone knew about the footage. They knew who the real hero was. But Arif walked in as usual, early and humble, pushing his cart through the glass doors. He nodded politely to the receptionist, gave a small smile, and began his day. He didn't walk with pride or expectation. To him, he was just doing his job. That morning, however, the atmosphere felt different. Employees greeted him warmly, some even stopping to thank him. At first, Arif was confused. He tilted his head, not sure why so many people were suddenly smiling at him. He gave polite nods in return and went on with his work. When Kamal arrived, the office grew tense again. People watched closely, wondering what he would do. Would he apologize? Would he stay silent? Or would he try to cover his mistake? Arif was cleaning near the main hallway when the manager walked past. Their eyes met for a brief moment. Kamal quickly looked away, his face stiff, and marched into his office without a word. The employees exchanged disappointed looks. They had hoped he would admit his mistake, but it seemed his pride was stronger than his conscience. Arif, however, didn't seem bothered. He continued his work, sweeping the hallway with his usual calmness. If he felt anything about the situation, he didn't show it. His strength lay in his silence, and that silence now spoke louder than any words could. Still, deep down, something had changed. The staff no longer saw Arif as just the quiet cleaning man. They now saw him as a man of integrity, someone who noticed details others missed, someone who protected the company when no one else was watching. The footage had not only proven his innocence but had also revealed the depth of his character. And though the manager refused to admit his fault, the truth had already been written in the minds of everyone present. The man who was ridiculed for his silence had just silenced his mocker. Not with anger, not with revenge, but with undeniable truth. But this was not the end of the story. What happened in the coming days would push the situation even further, leading to consequences no one had expected. The office was about to change in ways that would leave a lasting mark on everyone, especially the manager. For now, Arif continued in his quiet dignity, unaware of the storm his actions had stirred. The news about the surveillance footage spread through the entire building faster than anyone expected. By the time the week ended, every employee, from the receptionist at the front desk to the senior staff on the top floor, knew what had been revealed. The man who had been mocked, doubted, and accused had turned out to be the one who protected them all. The respect toward Arif began to grow quietly but steadily. When he walked in each morning with his cart, people greeted him with genuine warmth. Some clapped him on the shoulder, others nodded with admiration. Even those who had once stayed silent when the manager mocked him now went out of their way to show kindness. They offered him cups of tea, wrote little thank you notes, or simply gave him a smile that said, "We see you now." But while the employees celebrated the truth, the manager carried himself differently. His once confident walk seemed heavier. His voice, once filled with authority, no longer carried the same strength. Though he tried to act as if nothing had changed, the look in people's eyes reminded him every day of what had been exposed. His pride had taken a blow, and though he didn't admit it, he felt the sting of his own arrogance. One morning, when Arif was polishing the lobby floor, the receptionist leaned over the desk and whispered, "You're the reason our things are safe." "Thank you." Arif looked up surprised, then gave a small bow and a smile. He didn't crave praise, but in that moment he felt seen in a way he hadn't for years. Still, despite the shift in how people treated him, the tension with the manager remained. Kamal avoided looking at him, avoided speaking to him directly, and when he did, his words were clipped and sharp. He never apologized, not once, but the employees remembered the footage. They remembered how quickly the manager had accused Arif, and how cruelly he had treated him for weeks before that. And slowly their loyalty began to shift. They no longer admired the manager's authority. Instead, they admired the quiet cleaner who had proven himself without ever saying a word. One day, a small meeting was held by higher management. It wasn't about Arif at first, it was about company performance. But during the meeting, one of the senior staff members brought up the incident. "We need to address the way our employees are treated," she said firmly, "especially those who are vulnerable. What happened with the cleaner was unacceptable." The room fell silent. Everyone knew she was right. Finally, someone was speaking the truth out loud. Another staff member added, "He's been here longer than many of us. He deserves respect." And instead, he was humiliated in front of everyone. Though Arif wasn't present in the meeting, his name echoed through the walls of the building. His dignity, his patience, his quiet strength, they had all left a mark. Meanwhile, Arif continued with his work. He didn't know about the discussions happening behind closed doors. He didn't know that employees were speaking up for him, or that management was questioning the behavior of their manager. He only knew his duties, and he fulfilled them with the same care he always had. One evening, as he was emptying the trash bins in the conference room, 2 employees walked in. They didn't notice him at first and continued their conversation. "Do you think the manager will get in trouble for how he treated him?" one asked. The other replied, "Honestly, he should. He crossed every line. And after the cameras showed the truth, how can anyone respect him now?" Arif paused, holding the trash bag in his hand. He wasn't sure whether to stay or leave. He didn't like to hear people speak badly about anyone, even someone who had been cruel to him. So he quietly finished his task and walked out without interrupting. He believed dignity came from rising above bitterness, but destiny has a way of revealing more than we expect. A few days later, another shocking detail came out. When security checked deeper into the camera records, they realized the intruder who had been caught that night had actually been inside the building before. He had been seen wandering near the back entrance on different nights, but nobody had noticed except Arif. On one recording, Arif could be seen glancing toward the dark hallway more than once, as though sensing something. He may not have been able to hear footsteps, but his eyes caught movements others ignored. His alertness was what had kept the building safe multiple times. This revelation spread through the staff again, and people shook their heads in amazement. "He's not just a cleaner," one of them said. "He's the reason nothing worse has happened." The manager, hearing this, felt his face burn with shame. He had spent weeks mocking the very man whose silence had saved them more than once. But instead of admitting his fault, he grew more bitter inside. Pride is a heavy weight to carry, and his pride didn't allow him to bow his head. One morning, when Arif was cleaning near the elevators, the manager walked past him quickly. For the first time, his steps slowed. He glanced at Arif, who was bent over, polishing the shiny floor. For a brief second, it seemed as if Kamal wanted to say something. His lips parted slightly, his eyes shifted uneasily. But then he straightened his shoulders, clenched his jaw, and walked away without a word. Arif didn't notice. He simply continued working, lost in his quiet world, humming softly in silence. The employees, however, noticed everything. They saw the struggle on the manager's face, the way guilt tugged at him but never won. They talked about it quietly among themselves, agreeing that an apology would have made things right. But when none came, their respect for him sank even lower. In the days that followed, the staff began treating Arif differently. They didn't see him as invisible anymore. When they passed him in the hallways, they greeted him warmly. Some even learned a few basic hand signs to say thank you or good morning. For the first time in years, Arif felt truly included in the life of the office. One evening, as he was leaving the building, a group of employees stopped him at the door. They handed him a small envelope. Inside was a simple card with dozens of signatures and messages. "Thank you for protecting us," one note said. Another read, "Your hard work means more than you know." Arif's eyes softened as he held the card. He pressed his hand to his chest, smiled, and bowed his head. He didn't need words. His heart understood. That night, as he walked home through the quiet streets, he thought about how life had changed in just a few weeks. From being mocked and humiliated to being respected and celebrated, it was a journey he never expected. Yet he didn't let pride take over. He still believed that kindness was the strongest response to cruelty. Back at the office, however, the storm around the manager was far from over. The higher management had been observing, listening, and reviewing the complaints that employees had quietly shared after the incident. They weren't just looking at the surveillance footage anymore. They were looking at the bigger picture. The man who once thought power gave him the right to mock others was now under the microscope. And soon the consequences of his actions would arrive, in a way that would leave him speechless. For Arif, life went on as quietly as before. He didn't ask for recognition, didn't demand an apology, and didn't expect rewards. But the truth had already rewritten his place in that office. He was no longer invisible. His silence had spoken louder than words, and everyone had heard it. The building felt different now. There was a quiet change in the air, something that couldn't be described but could easily be felt. Where once people hurried past Arif without notice, now they paused, smiled, or greeted him warmly. Where once he had been invisible, now he was seen. His silence, which many thought of as weakness, had become a sign of strength. Yet even though the employees treated him differently, one person had not changed: the manager. Kamal still carried himself with the same stiff pride. He still spoke in a sharp tone, still avoided looking at Arif, and still refused to admit what everyone already knew. He had been wrong. The staff grew more restless with each passing day. They whispered about it in the cafeteria, in the elevators, even during meetings. "Why can't he just say sorry?" someone asked one afternoon. "Is it really that hard?" Another shook their head and replied, "It's pride. He can't accept that he was wrong, especially about someone he thought was beneath him." The truth was, the silence of the manager had become louder than his words. Everyone could see it. His refusal to apologize was like a stain that spread through the office atmosphere. No matter how much he tried to act normal, the respect he once commanded was gone. One morning, the higher management called for a meeting with all employees. People filled the large conference hall, wondering what it was about. Arif, as always, stood quietly near the back, holding a small cloth in his hand, ready to clean once the meeting was over. The head of the company spoke first. His voice was calm but firm. "We have built this workplace on respect, on dignity, and on valuing every member of our team. Recently, something happened that reminded us all how important those values are." The room went still. Everyone knew what he was talking about. The head continued. "One of our longest-serving staff members was humiliated, doubted, and treated unfairly. Yet instead of reacting with anger, he continued to serve with dedication. And when the moment came, he protected this company from harm. He showed us what true integrity looks like." The employees began clapping softly, then louder. All eyes turned toward Arif, who stood in the back, looking around in surprise. He hadn't expected this. He lowered his head, his cheeks turning slightly red, and pressed his hand to his chest in gratitude. The head of the company raised his hand for silence. "Arif," he said, his voice carrying warmth, "you are not just a cleaner here. You are part of this family, and today we want you to know that we respect you, we thank you, and we stand with you." The applause grew louder, filling the hall. Some employees even stood, clapping harder. Arif looked down, overwhelmed. He wasn't used to this kind of attention. All he had ever wanted was to do his work honestly. But now everyone was telling him he was more than that. He was valued. Meanwhile, the manager sat stiffly in his chair near the front. His face was pale, his jaw tight. He knew the speech wasn't just about honoring Arif. It was about pointing out his own cruelty. The more people clapped, the smaller he felt in his seat. The head then turned his gaze toward Kamal. His tone changed slightly, becoming sharper. "And let this also be a reminder. Power is not given to humiliate others. Leadership is not about mocking, but about lifting people up. When we forget this, we lose the respect of those around us." The words landed heavily in the room. Everyone looked toward the manager. He shifted uncomfortably, gripping the armrest of his chair. For a moment, it seemed he might stand and finally admit his wrong. His lips parted, his eyes flickered toward Arif, but then, just like before, his pride held him back. He lowered his gaze and said nothing. The disappointment in the room was clear. People shook their heads quietly. Some exchanged looks that said more than words ever could. The manager had been given a chance, but he had wasted it. The meeting ended with employees gathering around Arif, some patting his back, others giving him small notes of thanks. One person handed him a little badge that read, "True Team Member." Arif smiled shyly and tucked it into his pocket. Over the next few weeks, life in the office continued. Deadlines, meetings, clients, it all went on as usual. But the dynamics had shifted forever. Arif was no longer just the man with the cart. He had become a symbol of dignity, patience, and quiet strength. Employees began inviting him to join them during lunch breaks. Some even took time to learn more sign language, greeting him with new signs that made his eyes light up. The bond grew stronger, and for the first time in years, Arif felt like he truly belonged. As for the manager, his authority continued to fade. He noticed how employees no longer rushed to please him. They followed instructions but without admiration. Respect cannot be forced, and his had been lost the day the footage was shown. Eventually, higher management made a decision. They reassigned the manager to another branch, far away from the building where the incident had happened. Officially, it was called a transfer, but everyone knew the truth. His behavior had cost him his standing. When he left, there was no grand farewell. A few polite handshakes, a few stiff goodbyes, but nothing more. The employees saved their warmth for someone else. That same evening, they organized a small gathering for Arif in the cafeteria. They decorated the room with balloons and wrote a big sign on the wall. "Thank you, Arif." The tables were filled with snacks and drinks, and everyone gathered with genuine smiles. When Arif walked in and saw it, he stopped in his tracks, his eyes wide. For a moment, he didn't move. Then slowly, he walked forward. His hands trembled slightly as he touched the sign on the wall. He looked at the faces around him, faces that were no longer mocking, no longer ignoring, but full of respect and warmth. His eyes grew moist. He covered his mouth with one hand and shook his head as if to say, "This is too much." But it wasn't too much. It was exactly what he deserved. That evening, laughter filled the room. Employees shared stories of small things Arif had done over the years. How he once stayed late to fix a broken chair. How he helped carry boxes without being asked. How he always made sure the office was spotless even during holidays. These stories, once unnoticed, now shone like treasures. Arif didn't give a speech. He didn't need to. He simply bowed deeply to everyone, pressing his hands together in gratitude. His silence said everything his voice could not. From that day on, the office never forgot the lesson. They realized that respect wasn't about titles or loud voices. True respect came from character, from integrity, from actions that spoke louder than words. And the man who lived in silence had taught them all the loudest lesson of their lives. As for Arif, he continued to work just as he always had, quietly, humbly, and with full dedication. But now he wasn't alone in his silence. The people around him spoke with their actions too, with kindness, with respect, and with the acknowledgement that every person, no matter their role, deserved dignity. And so, the man who had once been ridiculed stood tall, not because he demanded it, but because he had earned it. His story became one that employees would whisper to new staff for years to come. "Do you see that man?" they would say. "He's more than a cleaner. He's the heart of this place." In the end, the cruel words of a manager faded into nothing. What remained was the unshakable truth, that dignity can't be mocked, that silence can speak louder than arrogance, and that kindness, even in the face of cruelty, always wins.